There's a complete list.
I'm sorry, we wanted to have this workshop last week, which is the revision week. So I thought many more faculty members will be available, but unfortunately somehow it didn't click last week, so we have to do it today, this week when exams are going on. So a number of faculty members are on invigilation duties, so I don't expect many more to come, except those probably who are free. So maybe we will start by, because it's a smaller group, maybe we can start by introducing ourselves one by one. So maybe can I start with this?
I'm Avinash Gorgole. I'm assistant professor with liberal arts.
Yes, I'm Sharma. I teach at the law school.
Kathleen Madrowski, liberal arts.
I'm Aman Shah, director quality assurance.
I'm Danish Sheikh, I teach at the law school.
Good morning, I'm Mayank. I'm from the business school.
Hello everyone, my name is Khamna. I teach in business school.
Hello everyone, I'm Lavi Srivastav. I teach Spanish and I'm also taking an elective in law school on cinema.
Tarun Jal from Quality Assurance Office.
Ajay. I am Rajesh Sharma, quality assurance office. Okay.
Please, the floor is yours.
Okay, do I need a mic?
Not really.
No, that's what I don't think I
But
do.
I think for recording purposes.
No, you've got it on, right? They've got the little mic here.
Okay.
So I think this is okay. It just seems awkward. Okay, let's see. I am a big fan of quality assurance. And it is, I think, one of the least appreciated offices, but probably one of the most important at the university, on campus. I'll tell you why. There are two reasons. One is external. You always have to, when push comes to shove and you have NAC, UGC, any kind of accreditation, you're going to have to rely on quality assurance records. And you're going to have to, you know, it makes no sense to be tweaking them, forging them at the last minute, which a lot of people do, because that defies the entire purpose of what quality assurance is supposed to do. Now, I have a background in the United States where we put into practice a lot of quality assurance methods and exercises. And I'll tell you just from my own experience why I really like quality assurance. First of all, in the faculties that I've worked in, the faculty groups, it helps you, it obliges you to identify what your learning outcomes are. You know, you can be stumbling along for 20 years in a well-established department and not even realizing that you're not up to date in what you're supposed to be doing, how you're supposed to be serving your fellow students. So quality assurance and being able to define your outcomes is something that's really important. The second one is if you're going to launch programs, having that quality assurance, knowing what's missing in your program will help you identify the needs and help you create programs that aren't superficial. The third point, which I really like the most is, well, I find the most interesting and valuable, is the product of moderation. Where I've taught and where I continue to teach here, we have moderating sessions and we use rubrics. Do any of you use rubrics in quality assurance? You do, okay. We use rubrics in JSLH all the time. And you know, grading is, putting in marks is subjective. I mean, there's, you know, you try to get around it, but it's quite subjective. Either the questionnaires, if they're multiple choice, they're very subjective too. They often do not test qualitative information. But if you have essays, which are more difficult, you still have, I think, a greater scope of deciding what your students need to learn. And moderating sessions are when a group of faculty has a common set of responses. They then do the grading. This is not the final grade, it's an exercise, and discuss why they've given the marks for it. So it lets you see why one person considers something very top paper and someone else considers it woefully lacking. And this is a great platform for discussion on how you have assessed what your students are doing. And then, of course, my final point is credibility. You establish credibility within your department, within your school, and that reaches out to this credibility is very important when you're talking to people from other countries. All of us, I think, are engaged in the internationalization process. So we do have faculty from other places where there are other grading habits, other assessment habits. We are also placing our students in schools that are either for short-term, long-term, midterm exercises, or inviting students to come to our programs. So these are really important reasons why you have to be able to show where you really are able to validate what you're saying about your program, about the learning outcomes, about what you're doing and how you're doing it. So I am I really like quality assurance, and I think it's very interesting. It's one of the most valuable aspects of program development. Okay, thank you.
Thank you very much, Kathleen. It's always nice to have good friends and neighbors like the Dean of the School of Liberal Arts and Humanities. So at least I can say that there's one person in this university who really believes in quality assurance. I don't know about others. There may be others as well, but as Kathleen has pointed out, quality assurance is a tough job because a number of times people feel that we are stepping on their toes, although that is not what we are doing. We are trying to facilitate and trying to be helpful and trying to see how we can comply with the requirements of professional bodies, of accrediting bodies, and so on, and also ensuring that we all meet the stated objectives of the university, which are exemplified, which are stated in the vision and mission of the university and the statement of graduate attributes of the university. So thank you very much, Kathleen, for you're very generous in your remarks. I think the next thing I'd like to say is to thank Shanoy Das and Mayank Dhandial for agreeing to participate in this workshop and to give a presentation, because I was intending this to be an experience sharing session, and that is how we should probably learn from each other. And Shanoy is a professor in the School of Law, and Mayank is a professor in the School of Business, because these are the two big schools. So I thought we should have faculty members from these two schools initially, and also in future I intend to have more such experience sharing sessions, because we can learn from each other. And the good thing about these two gentlemen is that they are outstanding teachers, and Shanoy has been so outstanding that the Chancellor walked into his class recently and stood there while he was conducting his class. So I think with those remarks, I'll request Shanoy to give his presentation. Thank you, Shanoy.
Well, thank you. So I think the Chancellor got in there by accident. And, found it difficult to get out because I was speaking too much. But so what I'm going to do is talk a little bit about the material. I wonder if the materials were shared. And
It has been.
So I circulated a course manual, which might be a bit helpful to look at as we go through this talk. It's so we've got about 50 minutes, but I think I should take only about 20 and then leave the rest to questions, or 25 and then leave the rest to questions.
Yeah.
So the brief is to talk about teaching with a focus on student learning outcomes. This is something that that we, at the beginning of term at the law school, this is something that we brainstorm about quite a bit, because we do a faculty development workshop at the beginning of term where it's important for all faculty members to participate. And I invite people from other schools to join in, because for the last 2 terms, conducting this has also been partly my responsibility. So when I first came here, I found these words, sort of student learning outcomes and things like that, a bit alienating, because it was difficult to figure out what is meant by student learning outcomes, and the jargon seemed to be a bit corporate, sort of firm-oriented jargon, which I thought was a bit out of place in the classroom. But we have tried to tweak that a little bit and adapt it to what's appropriate to a classroom at a university. And I'm glad Danish is here, because Danish actually has also helped over the last year that he's been at the law school for several of us to think through our course manuals a little bit and the way in which we are delivering classes. So I'm also pointing to Mr. Shah to say that next time you should have Danish to talk more seriously about most of these things. But I'll say what I can. So I suppose the first thing about getting a course through in a way that the intended outcomes that we set out at the beginning of the year are somewhat delivered is to write a well thought out course manual. So I don't know what the practice in the other schools of the university are, but the practices in the law school were not very good in this respect. So for a long time we were circulating old course manuals that were written about 5-6 years back, and what we kept doing is that we kept using the same course manuals, especially because most of the courses are what we call core courses, or courses that are mandatorily prescribed by the Bar Council of India. Now, mandatory prescription actually is generally something that interests me a little bit, because when a regulator lays out the contours of courses, there's always an economic question as to whether we are incentivized to modify it, or are we incentivized to not modify it and simply go with a set pattern which the regulator has prescribed. And I feel like at the early years of the university, when I wasn't here, the course instructors took a lot of interest in writing course manuals, which, while complying with the necessary requirements of the Bar Council, did a few more things, and they were intended to encourage critical thinking among students, introduce them to a wide variety of texts and materials over and above what is prescribed by the regulator. But over time, what happened is that those really good course manuals obviously became dated, but they weren't updated over a period of time. And so one of the things that some of the new faculty members, including myself, have been trying to do is to rewrite our course manual every year. And I think this is something that is very important. So in order for us to make any reasonable progress with delivering a course in the way that we intend to deliver it, you cannot exclude the practice of writing a course manual every year. And when I say rewriting the course manual every year, I really mean rewriting the whole of the course manual every year. So this is a 13-page manual, and my aim would be to rewrite the 13 pages almost every year, and then use the course manual as an important instruction document. So again, there one of the things that I've gathered, and this is largely through doing the workshop in the law school, is that the course manual becomes some sort of a short syllabus, which is that this is for the instructor to know what is to be taught during the course of the term, and that's it. But the course manual is rarely read by students, and certainly not read as a document that contains any instruction. It is read as a document that just gives you, these are the topics to be covered. But that's something that others have actively encourage their students to start reading the course manual, and I've started doing that as well. Which is why if students are forced to read the course manual, then naturally one has to write a better course manual than we are. So if I just invite you all to sort of turn to the course manual if that's available. Is it available? It's just not available in my packet. Good. It's on the other side.
Is it?
Yeah. So the course manual that I have put out is a course manual that is meant to reach out to students of 5 sections. So you see there are 5 course instructors, and one of the interesting things of designing a course manual of this nature is that 5 instructors have to get together and agree on the content of the manual. Inevitably though, what happens is that the manual is then written by one of us, and in this case it's been written by me. But the content has at least been agreed upon by 5 people. That sort of a course manual has to strike a very neat balance between being everything that you want the course manual to be, but nothing more than somebody else does not want that manual to be, which is that it should not contain materials which which is not to the liking of another course instructor, or at least make it clear that the course manual is only an indicative guideline of what is going to be taught, and that the respective faculty members retain some amount of discretion in how they do the course. Alright, so that's one of the first things, and I don't know if this is a challenge in any of the other schools, because I think there sort of one faculty member teaches one subject, and but it's only in the law school that we have sort of 5-6 people teaching the same subject at one go because of the sheer size of the law school. But nonetheless, if we turn to course description now. So the course description, one of the things that I'd like to this is my sort of point number 1, which is that a course description for a course must lay out, I think, 2 different things. One, it must offer a better introduction to the course than a standard textbook in the course. Because standard textbooks in courses tend to drive, or at least in my experience in law school textbooks, the moment I read the introduction to a textbook, I definitely don't want to study that subject. But so one of the things that a course description must do is inevitably make it more interesting than a textbook, and has to describe the course much better. There are 2 things that I have thought of over the last 3 years, and I want to put those out there. One is that in an attempt to make the description better than textbooks, faculty members sometimes tend to make descriptions into the introduction to a scholarly article, which is that it's written rather well, but it is meant to appeal to your colleagues. And that is one of the things that we must assiduously avoid, which is that this is a manual that is to be read by a student who has not studied the course and is expected to know nothing about the course on the first day of the course. And so the course the course description must be must use terminology that's intuitive, must use language that is appealing, and at the same time lay out the broad contours of what is it that we're going to be studying over the next 6 months. And this is actually something that I actually learned from looking at Danish's course manual on contracts, which is one of the first courses that we teach at the law school. We teach it in the second year, which means that students are practically just out of, or we teach it in the first year. So students are just out of school. Throwing legal jargon at them at that stage is definitely a short recipe towards ensuring that they're not going to be interested in the course of contracts. But the way Danish wrote his course manual seemed something that would appeal to a second year student, without of course doing away with seriousness. It does not have to be frivolous, but it has to be written in a manner that's appealing, and which lays out the contours of the course well. I think one of the things that the course description does is then compels you to think as an instructor. And so while you're writing that description, you are looking at once to maintain the discipline that you're teaching and yet simplify what you are going to say. And at that point of time, it is in that exercise that you learn what you're going to actually do throughout your course. Because you realize that, well, these this is how much I can simplify the course, this is how much I can, make it appealing, while at the same time retaining the disciplinary boundaries within which I am supposed to instruct. So this exercise of writing this 1 or 2 paragraphs that I've written here actually took me, more than 3 hours to write it down, because I had to make sure that when I introduce this description on the first day of the course, I have my class with me in understanding what is it that they're going to go through for the next 6 months. So in terms of practices and in terms of doing things which I'm supposed to talk about, the first thing I'd say is that we should spend a lot of time writing course description in a way that's intuitive, appealing, and yet within the limitations of the discipline that we are talking about. The next thing is the course aims, and this is where the student learning outcomes come in. So this is a course called International Trade Law. It's taught in the 4th year, and it's a fairly advanced course in the legal discipline. It's not an easy course to go through by any means. My view is that this is a course that is so advanced that it should, or if taught properly or fully, should be taught to a master's student, because this is a fairly advanced, fairly technical course, and yet it is prescribed as an undergraduate course over here, which means that what we're working with is a set of students who have reached a certain degree of proficiency in the law because they're in the 4th year, but they've not still completed their legal education, which would prepare them to take on a course which is quite difficult. So one of the things that I did, and this is something that I obviously discussed with all my other colleagues who are teaching this course, and then we came to this consensus that we will to transform an advanced level course into its own introductory level. So this becomes International Trade Law Introductory rather than International Trade Law so we don't certify, and I make this very clear on the first day of the course, that I do not certify that at the end of this course you will be so well prepared that you could walk into a law firm and practice international trade law. But you will be so well prepared that you will be able to walk into a master's class and then get that additional input at a master's class so that you can then take up the sort of career move. So it's important, and I think this is something that would resonate across all schools, is to understanding that at the undergraduate level, what is it that we are preparing our students for? For example, at the law school, we make it, I think it's fairly clear that there are some subjects that we prepare our students so well in that even in the internship that follows at the end of the term, they should be able to go to a firm and do just fine, which they do very often. So students who are prepared in, say, the law of companies, what we call company law or corporation law, are able to go to firms and sort of clearly understand what's going on. They've been introduced at a level of sort of they've reached a level of competence where they can take up professional work, and since many of our schools actually deal with professionals, and not the School of Liberal Arts, but at least in the business school or the law school who are just churning out professionals, and it's sort of their it's I guess it's the reason why a lot of people even come to law schools or business schools. We as teachers, we often ask ourselves the question as to whether are we really preparing them as professionals, and many of us are sort of ambivalent on the point, because we also consider the law to be a fairly legal, an academic discipline, and in the sense that we're preparing students academically and not necessarily to just go out there and be very good lawyers, but that's also one of the sort of outcomes that is there at the back of our mind. So one of the things that I make quite clear at the beginning of the course is that this is not a course that will train you to practice international trade law, but it will train you to understand an advanced course in international trade law. So laying that down in the course aims is very important, and so I actually spent a lot of time writing this last paragraph, this paragraph where I wrote that this course aims to introduce you to the overall architecture of the international trade law and will equip you with the essential principles. I said that the course is capable of doing more than that. It is an essential building block of an intellectual edifice that we call law and globalization.
And I hope that this course will inspire you to think about globalization critically or with optimism, depending on what your political inclination is. And it could also serve as a stepping stone to studying international economy. It might be helpful for you to think about a career in international trade, but it will not prepare you for a career in international trade straight out of the course. And again, the first class is dedicated actually in making all of this clear, because otherwise there is there are two risks that I run. One is that I run the risk of not disclosing to my class what is the level at which I'm pitching the course, and the other hand I run the risk of of making it seem too easy, or a course that does not have to be taken seriously, because it's introductory and they may the risk is that they won't take it seriously. So there's again a razor's edge that you're walking, because you want to make sure that you tell them this is a very serious course, but it is not a course that prepares you the final word on the point, because you really need to go through another advanced course. So walking that razor's edge is an important part of the first class. In fact, it's an important part of many classes that keep coming up, because at various times when I'm asked a slightly heavy question in class, a question that requires me that requires of me to go beyond the prescribed terms in the syllabus, I often flirt with the answer in the class, and then I sort of tell the student that, look, we should talk about this a little more in office, but I want to make it clear that this course cannot, at least for the whole class, deliver that sort of an advanced instruction, and I'm fairly frank about the limitations of what I can achieve in 6 months. And I think that one of the things I think what makes a course reasonably well delivered, I suppose, is to be very frank about the limitations that we're working with, both in terms of time and logistics, but also in terms of just as teachers. We might have inherent limitations that I think we should be quite clear about. All right. So the next thing that I want to turn to is the intended learning outcomes and what. So I will not labor you through the rest of the course manual, but the intended learning outcomes. So now I don't know if this is a part of course manuals in the other schools. This is a required part of the course manual in the law school, and I suppose I was a bit disturbed by the fact that the intended learning outcomes in every course manual in law school was the same, which is that learning outcome A is that you know the law, learning outcome B is that you can think critically about the law, and learning outcome C is that you can synthesize all of this and analyze a given set of facts by applying the law. So, I mean, as an architecture of a way of thinking, that's fairly accurate. That's largely what you want to do with a course. But if that is not adapted to each and every course, then we suffer in terms of preparing ourselves as to what is it that we're setting out to deliver. There is a major risk that we run is when we write generalized learning outcomes, we haven't prepared ourselves at the beginning of the course with the outcomes that we're looking to deliver during the course, because we've written them in such a generalized fashion that we just sort of go into class every day and say, peace.
Sure, sorry to interrupt you. I think probably, so what happens in B school, because your accreditation happens for international bodies as well. So double ACSB or ACBSB or these kind of bodies, what they mandate is that at a program level also, program level as in, let's say, MBA level, there are common learning outcomes for all the courses.
Right.
So these are common for all the courses running in particular school's program. So at an MBA level, there will be some common learning outcomes, and then there will be specific subject-wise learning outcomes. So what you're referring to, probably, I don't know whether the law school is following that, but in B school we definitely follow some common learning outcomes for all the courses in a particular program.
Right.
And then there are some subject levels, so they are different.
Right.
But at a school level, for a particular program, let's say MBA, there would be some common learning outcomes.
And the common learning outcomes are set out by the university or there's a
The school.
the school?
So for example,
Right.
let's say at an MBA level, the learning outcomes for all the courses
Right.
would have common elements like critical reasoning, would have common elements like, how does the global factors affect the firm?
Right.
And you're trying to implement these learning outcomes across all the courses for that particular program.
Right.
And then you have your subject
That's-
specific different learning outcomes as well.
All right. So, and this is great. And let me just sort of quickly think through the point that you're making. And
No, I was just wondering whether the intent
No.
behind those common was that, or is it just
no. So we don't. Firstly, we don't have a school level prescribed learning outcomes that we must deliver. So
Sorry, if I can interrupt. I think what Mandy is saying is that each program will have a kind of program level outcomes.
Right.
And the course outcomes, there are several courses within the program. These need to match with the program level outcomes.
Right. So if the program level outcomes, and you should correct me if I'm wrong, is fairly generalized.
Yes, it is.
In the sense that if it's fairly generalized, then that becomes an indication or a sort of the rough architecture of what the course needs to be. But what I was trying to get at is that every course instructor must attempt to write the outcomes in a more specific and a more fleshed out manner, so that or at least it helps me do this, is that to prepare myself at the beginning of the course, knowing that, well, I have 3 outcomes that I wish to deliver, and this also then plays into my assessment pattern, because then the assessments must check for those 3 outcomes, and they must check for them separately. So there must be different assessments designed to check for each of the outcomes, and then that also helps the assessment be a slightly more meaningful process than, say, dry assessments. But you're going to talk about assessments
so
anywhere.
That's the point I was making. So for the way we run it is, let's say for my particular course, there are 4 learning outcomes that are generalized.
Right.
And fairly generic. They are common for all the courses. And then there are 4 learning outcomes specific to the course that I'm teaching. So in total there are 8 learning outcomes.
Right.
And that I'm trying to map. We just want to clarify.
Right.
So probably business school runs it a slightly different.
I think everyone runs that way though, because you do have, the programmatic outcomes, and then you've got your own class
Right.
course outcomes.
And the
I
program
think we're all
outcomes need to be
saying the
generic
same
because they
thing,
need to
yeah.
fit different.
Correct. I mean, they need to, yeah. So let me just, I think one interesting way is to just come to paragraph, page 4 of this and see. So as I said, the general architecture of outcomes in a core law course is to be able to, know sort of what we call the black letter law, or know the law. The second is to be able to apply the law in order to solve a dispute or solve a sort of a factual question in the world. And third is to be able to critically deal with that legal question. Ask yourself the question as to, is this a fair, is this a fair legal provision? Does it, what could be a possible feminist critique? What could be a possible, Marxist critique, or so on and so forth, or whatever the ways in which you want to critically approach the legal sort of question. Now, if we come to page 4, I am, generally following that same thing, except that I am writing, sort of fleshing out those 3 things into a greater degree of detail, and that then helps my assessment, because I say, for example, and none of these words, for example, are wasted. So when I say that you describe with reasonable accuracy the field of WTO law and the key substantive legal rules that form this field, I actually mean the word reasonable accuracy with, it's there for a reason. It is because I am also looking at people to get to reasonable accuracy and not to, a greater degree of accuracy. Because if I actually showed you the body of WTO law, it runs into, the statute book itself is about, say, 800 pages long. I do not expect my students to know what's exactly, all of the sort of the nitty-gritties of the language in that 800 pages. But I should be able to ask him to still, or her to keep that book aside for a minute and then talk to me in a conversation and describe those same rules with reasonable accuracy. And so this is not, for example, a wasted word over here. So, and then this sets up both the student's expectation from the course, but also my expectation as to how I wish to design my class. So for example, had I aimed to teach a student to describe the field of WTO law with complete accuracy, then the amount of time that I'd have to spend in class reading and rereading the provision would be much greater than I do. So I spend lesser time with that because all I want them to do is describe the rule with reasonable accuracy, which means that I can show them the rule once and then broadly describe it in class and spend a lot more time explaining the rule, work with different sort of teaching methods, for example, using a lot more, what in the law school we call hypotheticals, or what in the business school is largely called case studies or things like that, similar. So spend a lot more time with those and spend a lot less time with the text of the rules, which is obviously a big deal in the law school because you have to talk about the text of the rules quite a bit. But since I've also set that outcome at a different level, I get to bargain with the time that I spend with the text and then use up that time in, say, doing a case study. So this is something that I work with, and so the words reasonable accuracy actually deliberately introduced. And then the next one is to apply the substantive rules of WTO law to solve legal problems. In other words, the taste of practicing WTO law. But again, the taste of practicing WTO law is quite important over there because I'm only intending to give them a taste of what it means to apply these sort of complex legal provisions to a world situation. Because typically, again, a WTO dispute would involve a factual pattern that has raised itself over years of disputes between two countries, and sort of serious trade violations on both sides. And I again wish to bring that to a fairly simplified form in the classroom, and therefore again setting the bar at one notch below the sort of what the world would think is the WTO law is very important for the purpose of the classroom. And then I also assign a lot of weight to that. So there's 50% weight to that outcome, which then it makes it fairly clear that in a class that I'm teaching, I must spend a lot of time doing these case studies and slightly lesser time doing teaching than the text of the rules. And finally, 25% is dedicated to that critical question. But what's important is that I lay out what are the critical questions at the end of the day. And those critical questions, so at page 5 I say whether certain rules are good or bad by referring to a set of moral and political questions on the distribution of resources, on the nature of sovereignty, and the nature of economic development, which means that the parameters of critique have been set out in the course manual, which means that while there may be a wider variety of questions that we could ask critically, those are questions that I am largely willing to deal with in my office and not in the classroom, because the 25% has also told me that there's only so much time in the classroom that I'm going to dedicate to critical answering. So again, I guess what I'm getting back is again paying a lot of attention to writing these parts of the course manual really helps me decide on what I'm going to do with the time in the classroom. How much of it is lecture? How much of it is discussion? So if 50%, for example, is case study, that means that a fair amount of time has to be spent in class in inviting the students to participate in that study rather than in talking in class. But had I just swapped these sort of numbers around in terms of weight, then I would have had to accordingly adjust my lecturing time. So in fact, one way to do this on a different date would be to show you to another different course manual where the weightage is significantly different and a higher weightage in the critical component, where I then spend a lot of time talking and I spend a lot more time lecturing that class than I do in this class. So these are things that I thought about. Yes.
How many students are in class?
So I have 55 and I teach 2 sections, so that's 110 students that I teach a week. Yes, yeah. Yeah, I mean, I guess the other thing is to think that in the law school we are teaching with really big classrooms, and so one of the sort of critical exercises that we must do at the beginning of the year is to set that bar. I guess the overall learning outcome that I have, which I don't disclose anywhere in this manual, but which is absolutely key to me, is that I walk the last mile of my class through, the hoops. I mean, for me, because the law school also, because it's so big, there are also absolutely brilliant students in the classroom, who could push me to take this course 3 notches higher, and I have to resist that urge significantly through the 6 months that I teach the course, or the 5 months that I teach the course, because I fully intend to walk the last mile of my class through the hoops, the elements of international trade. And so, which is why this is such a sort of important exercise. This is both meditative as well as, cleansing and all of those things that I have to do for hours before I send this course manual out. And the last thing that I point out, and then I'll stop, is that I use the course manual as an instruction document so between pages 7 to 11, we describe the various modules that are going to be taught, so which is the core part of the syllabus. But syllabuses should, in my view, not contain headings just. Syllabuses tend to often be headings, module names, prescribed readings, headings, module name, prescribed readings. This was the case with many of these course manuals, including this one till I rewrote it. And one of the things that I will credit Danish for teaching me this, is to write very substantive paragraphs at the beginning. And these substantive paragraphs offer, in my view, and this is, I don't wish to be proud, but these offer a very neat sneak peek into what you're going to study in the week. I mean, if you did not attend the class, but you read this first paragraph, you at least had a sense of what you missed. And so that you will be able to come and ask me the right questions in order to catch up as well. Because writing this so textbooks, these paragraphs are really sort of better than reading the first 2 pages of the textbook on that chapter. So it's better than doing that. I put a lot of heart into this, because this is me thinking back as a student of international trade law, what did I learn in these subjects, and then writing that down in the language of a student, saying, what we have learned is this, what is this, and so rewriting that. And to write this, actually, I refer back to my own old sort of college and university notes on what I studied in trade law, and I sort of write it on that basis. And this helps. So I do not begin a module unless I make my students go back, open the course manual again, read what the module is about. Once you know what the module is about, we can start a conversation straight away. So this really takes away the problem of, often enough the prescribed reading for the week is just the course manual. So just read the course manual and come. We'll talk about the rest of the things in the classroom, because I know the materials in this course especially are very, very difficult, and I intend to handhold my students through the course materials. But what I do request of them to do is to read the manual and come, so that you know what we're talking about at the beginning of the course. And so actually, the way the sort of syllabus is written is like a story. It sort of unfolds on a week-to-week basis. Last week we learned this week we learned that. And that's the language also of the descriptive paragraph, saying last week we studied this, from there the natural question that arises is this, and so we'll follow up with these sort of questions. I guess, in terms of experience sharing, everybody has different ways of conducting the classroom, and I don't know if mine is any better than anybody else's. So in terms of experience sharing, the real experience that I'd like to share is that the amount of time that you marinate this course manual in your hand before you submit it will really help you design the rest of the semester's workload, and sort of tell you very clearly what you have to do in the classroom. And after that, delivering is everybody's job, and I'm sure people are more competent at it than I am. But what I would suggest as a practice going forward is to spend considerable amount of time rethinking and thinking the course manual, because that sets the tone for the rest of the term. So I think I'll stop there, unless there's anything else that you'd like me to address, and we can
I'm really impressed. I think that's very good. I think your central theme of you really need to spend the time. Many times people just quickly sketch out what they're going to do and play it by ear as they go along. And I think being intentional, especially when you're dealing with a large number, you really can't improvise all the time if you have a large number of students. And the nature of your courses make it really important that they accomplish a certain amount of information. That's what I think would be very important. One question I have is, given the course manual, given your weighting here, how it's weighted, what the outcomes are, how do you get your students involved? I think this is, the course manual is great for review. I think it really is a help for students, like you said, who, may have skipped a class, but then they know where this fits in. They don't have to guess. I think that's terrific. I think your dedication to creating a good course is something that students will sense immediately. But how do you get them involved in the class? Because you have, I think all of us experience a few brilliant students, and then there are the rest. And the question of dominating the material, the students who are brilliant usually have done all the work. How do you get the rest to come along?
If I may just add to what Catherine said, is that in case of electives, right, we have a set of undergraduate students as well as 4th year and 5th year students. So ensuring that because the capability of the understanding of the critical and the student learning outcomes are based on the readings that we provide throughout the semester. But sometimes those readings are rigorous for some people, it is not for the other students. So how do we ensure this outcome?
Yeah. Okay, so if I think I should just quickly answer. Yeah, I mean, Professor Modrowski, you're absolutely right that I guess the focus of my teaching is that you don't play it by the ear at any point of time in the course, and that's true. Now, how do I get the students involved? And so this is a slightly different thing from. But this is something that I'm going to say that's completely new, which is the following: that so when I first joined here, I learned from at least one very successful professor was then at the associate level, Preetham, who. So the way that I get the last mile in the class involved is that I set out at the very beginning of the class. I understood that there is a limitation to how much I can deliver to the last mile, because I have to. So 30 minutes of a 2.5-hour class, and we have 2.5-hour class in the law school. 30 minutes of 2.5 hour. So one of the things that we had tried much earlier is to try tutorials as one of the way to go through, and tutorials didn't really work so much. Because tutorials as individual exercises leave the students in the same situation that they had had I been lecturing. It is just that I stop lecturing and then do a tutorial. So we don't do tutorials. What I do for half an hour is the following. So at the beginning of the term, I divide students of a class of 50, say, into groups of 5. That means 10 groups of 5. Now there is a portion of my assessment and I think everybody has a portion of assessment called class participation. Now, class participation in my class is graded on the basis of your performance in a group of 5. Now, every day during the class, for half an hour, I ask a question based on only that day's class. So I ask one and it's usually a case study a question, which is that I set out a fact pattern on the board and I say that, okay, we studied this law today, tell me how do you think this dispute is likely to be resolved. Then 15 minutes are left to the students to talk about it amongst themselves, and then I pick one person from every group to answer that question. And then I tell them the group stays afloat on the basis of the person who's answering, which means that if that answer is good, then everybody scores 5 on 5 for the day, but if the answer is bad, then everybody scores 0 on 5 for the day, and there are grades in between for that. And then the average of that becomes your class participation grade. What that ensures is that everybody in that 5 is invested in answering the question for the day and ensuring the right questions are. And I have seen that in that exercise, if there are 3 decent students in the group, one good student and one student who I haven't been able to reach out to at the end, the students have reached out to that person. Because that person is also going to be called on a certain day to answer, and that person therefore has to be well prepared. The students in small groups of 5 deliver amazing outcomes to each other, which as instructors, especially in big classes, I have, it's just beyond the instructor to do. So it's not group discussion in the sense that you're competing with each other in the group. It's 20 minutes of supervised student teaching each other in class. So I would spend that, so I'd make them sit together and talk, and I'd also talk with them, and so I'd move around in groups and talk with them, and it's that talking that helps. Actually, I have found that just what helps at the end of the day in getting students involved is that making sure that there are 4 other people who are invested in one more person's success in the classroom, because one person's marks also carries 4 other people's marks on the back of so by just playing around with incentives a little bit over there, by making sure that everybody is invested in the success of 4 other people in the group, I make sure that they're learning a little bit more than I would have been able to achieve. Now that's not certain to do everything that we set out to do, but I have at least seen that the involvement of every student in the class increases that much more, because they have to make sure that at least 4 of their neighbors know the course better and so know it as well as they do. So I remove some of the incentives to compete with each other, and I make it a little more collaborative, I guess. So that's something that this is a practice that I followed every semester for the last 6 semesters, and this has worked reasonably well.
And that also responds to one of the learning outcomes that's recognized internationally, and that's creating cooperation and teamwork, because you're really building that.
Yes. As far as electives go, now I have taught 2 electives in the last 6 semesters, and you are right that electives tend to deal with scholarly readings, and I think that one of the mistakes, and be pretty frank about it, I think one of the mistakes we make with electives is think of electives as these sort of top-notch seminar courses that are taught. Many of us in this university, for whatever reasons, have come from big universities abroad, and we've seen what great sort of seminars are like and what workshops are like. It's just absurd, I think, to expect that undergraduate students are going to be able to deliver it. I think the thing that I do, therefore, with readings is that I extract readings. So in electives, I act as an editor of readings, and so if I assigned a seminal sort of 40 pages of volume 1, chapter 1 of Capital, then I would have extracted that into 20 paragraphs, and I would have said that you read these 20 paragraphs that I've extracted for you. So I do a lot of extracting in the electives, and that helps. So I think electives become very, very hard work, therefore, because you're spending so much time extracting the materials and then sort of encouraging students to read. Okay, I don't expect you to read a 50-page article, but I do expect you to read 20 paragraphs. And 20 paragraphs well extracted is which then means that we are also thinking of really decent articles from which we can extract 20 paragraphs, because some scholarly articles are so poorly written that you can't extract from them. But if there are good ones, then I think that my sort of standard move is to introduction and conclusion for sure, and then work in between the sections but never more than 20 paragraphs of reading in an elective. So if you do the editorial work, it might be better, and that's at least works for me. But I'm not promising that works.
But in that case, I did a very the readings were not quite, they were not too rigorous, they were fine. But what I felt was, because the course was in cinema, so I asked them to watch certain movies outside the classroom hours, right? So when it was a course on introduction of Indian cinema, so they were not willing to watch the black and white movies. It was very hard to make them watch those black and white movies. Secondly, what I faced that they think that a film course means only watching a movie and having an analysis on that how is the hero, how is the prop, nothing, and they have no understanding of the lenses, the feminist critique or the post-colonial. Even if they have done the readings, they were not ready to look the film through those lenses. So, what I feel, especially that they were not ready to watch the movies outside the classroom, that let me not come up to the student learning outcomes.
Yeah, it's a hard question, right? How do I tailor an answer to your query? Let me see. So one of the things that, and I do not offer this as an answer, and I wish to be very, very clear because I've never taught a course that relies heavily on audiovisual material, actually. So I do not wish to proffer this as an answer, but sometimes I act as a discussant to some movies that are shown on campus generally. Perhaps perhaps one could think of ways of watching movies together, even if they're outside the classroom, just ways of watching movies together. Or also, and especially if we're looking at studying movies critically, I used to sometimes, I've sometimes asked for scenes to be paused and sort of then magnify the scene and then help them out, saying that look, as a feminist you might want to look at that scene this way and think of what the protagonist is doing, what he's saying, how the camera angle is moving, is it magnifying the woman on screen or is it not, or is it receding her to the background and things like that. This is just things that I've done as a discussant in the movies, but I really can't say much about how a film-based elective would otherwise run when you need students to watch the movies outside the classroom. But perhaps we could think about watching films together. And I mean, as I said, I guess one of the things is that I give very little homework actually, or sort of go back and do this by yourself is something that I do very, very little. I do a lot more work in the classroom and I do a lot more work together. So sort of get people together and say, let's do these things together. Let's sit together and read something. Let's sit together and watch something.
But in case of movie watching, it's like outside the class hours is fine. It's not a rigorous reading I'm asking them to do it, but rather watching a film. So this is like what I wanted to share regarding my course.
Are there any marks associated if they stand to lose if they don't
watch the movie? No, it wasn't.
So
because
I think
watching
maybe
movies
we
and
can start from there. I think there are 2-3 things that possibly I'm just sort of thinking out loud here. But one thing that possibly can happen is that the movies need to be more interesting. I mean, if they are black and white, so students have a very, very little attention span, and that is something that we can't help. I mean, this is the reality, right?
Yeah.
So we can't say that why this is happening, and this is the way it is. So we've got to adapt ourselves in order to make sure that the content is interesting, and we've got to sugarcoat your material in order to achieve the same learning outcomes. So I mean, what I'm saying is, if that can be helped, maybe you can look at that.
Yeah.
Secondly, what you can do is you can put marks, let's say class participation or otherwise, that they stand to lose if they don't watch the movie and come to the class unprepared. So right at the start, you say that if not prepared, please leave the class, which I do very often. So I set the benchmarks very, very clear. So in a B-school setting, we're talking about cases. And if the students have not prepared the case, let's say it's a 30-page case, okay, there is no way that that kind of pedagogy is going to be successful, because then it turns into a lecture, which is precisely what I don't want to do. And so the way to make it happen then is, of course, make it mandatory for them to not only bring a hard copy in the class, which I can see, but also to make sure that there's an agreement between the teacher and the student that if you not read it, then you leave the classroom as well. So in order to continue in the classroom and to get attendance, and there are other levers that you can pull, basically you're trying to make sure that the student has brought the hard copy of the case in mind context, and they have prepared the case well. Okay, and the class participation, attendance, and other marks also are dependent on that. And it's very, very clear to them that if they don't do it, then they lose it. Like they stand to actually
So it has to be hard on marking, and the marks are the incentive.
What I'm saying is differently. So make the content more interesting, possibly pull the levers of the marks, and generally also you've got to sort of counsel them to make sure that in order for this course to succeed, you've got to do that. Otherwise this is not going to
Thank you. Yes,
I have one comment about sugarcoating. I think that's a really difficult thing, because in a way you risk dumbing down the class and the students. So say you're teaching cinema, and one of the seminal works is Tarkovsky in Russian cinema zone. So you kind of need this, because filmmakers have used these, Eisenstein, Tarkovsky, other filmmakers have used it. So these become almost like the seminal text. I think that it's very difficult to avoid some things that may be boring, that maybe in little bits you can bring them in, because there's Bollywood and color, lights, music, but they know that already. And we have a music instructor who's a classical music instructor, Priya Kunalga, who introduces classical music through Bollywood and then eases the students in showing them within the music how actually this all comes from Indian classical music. I feel sort of stimulating, and it's hard with the time, but kind of getting them excited about something, and that puts a huge weight on the instructor to try and inspire, get them excited. But I feel we can't just work within a narrow frame where the students will be happy with what they're getting. I just have another one. I was teaching using Levinas once, and this was for second year students. They couldn't read it, they were horrified by it. So I had a team who happened to love Levinas. I said, take the sort of like combing through the chapters. Take these 3 chapters that are really important and write it for students. And they rewrote it, and it was really great because the students kind of got into it and really liked the way it was written by the other students. So I mean, that's something else. If you have the time and can work with it, there are other ways to get around it.
Just to add to that, I totally agree that you in all the contexts, you of course cannot. In some cases, you just can't help it because that's the way it is, right? And the learning objective that you're trying to achieve in the classroom cannot be helped. That's the case. That's the movie you've got to watch. Okay, and in that case, you can't. But there are other ways. There may be other sessions where the same learning objectives you could achieve by other means. And then, as an instructor, I think it's our responsibility to make sure are we looking enough in other areas in order to achieve the same learning objective. So, for example, I can give case, and that's the standard Harvard methodology in a B school. But I think that's very outdated. I think that's very 90s, and and going forward, I think if we rely only on case as a business school, I think that doesn't help. And there are some sessions where I've sort of changed the methodology and the pedagogy from a case to a class-based exercise, where the students are doing more experiential and hands-on activities in the class, and they get excited. And the same learning objectives I'm trying to achieve through that. So I'm just saying, in some cases can't be held, in some cases maybe you can look at other avenues to sort of achieve the same learning.
So thank you very much. I think we have a good exchange of views, and I'm grateful to Shanoy to give this presentation. And when he shared this document with me, I was really impressed, as Kathleen has said, because it's a document which is written according to the principles of outcomes-based teaching and learning, very much so, because it has all the parameters which an outcomes-based education has in it, which was very well described by Shanoy himself. Now, what I found from this presentation is that there are some international best practices which Shanoy has implemented in writing up this document and in course delivery as well. Some of them, for example, reviewing the course manual annually is an international best practice. And the second thing is that once the document has been reviewed, it has to be well written as well. That is an international best practice. And then the most important thing, which lots of people write the document and present it to the class and to the students, but don't do the follow-up, which is important, which is talk about it in the first class. Students have to be inducted into it. They have to be oriented towards what the document, what the course will be about, how it will be conducted, how it will be delivered, what are the things which they need to pay attention to. And that is a very good practice which some of the professors, some faculty members fail to take advantage of that very first class. And then the document, the manual itself is written in a way which is very, very clear. Clarity is important both for the instructor and also for the students and also for accreditors. When you have audit teams, if they look at the document, it should be clear to them how the course has been constructed and how it is being delivered. So that is again a very good practice. And the last point I'd like to say is about engaging the class. Again, Shanoy has given a very good example of an international best practice, when you have a large class, dividing it into smaller groups, because students, when you pose a question to them in a large class, so many of them may know the answer, but they are hesitant to respond because they may think that it is the wrong answer, people may laugh at them, whatever it is. So when you divide them up into smaller groups and get them to rehearse the answers, they are well prepared and they are able to exchange ideas and they come up with very good answers as you have described. So that is again a very good practice. But one question which I have shown out for you is that now this course is taught by 5 teachers. The way you have described it and the way you have talked about it today, my question is, do all the other instructors deliver the course in the manner which you have described?
Oh, well. So I don't know, this is, I mean, I'll be candid in saying that, so for example, so when I first taught this course year back, I was not, so in the law school we have all instructors, but amongst instructors there's, a course coordinator who's then primarily responsible for ensuring that the manual is out and things like that, or the examination is set on time. So we're like the fall guy for the rest of our colleagues. And so this is the first time that I am the coordinator of this course. Previously I was not the coordinator of the course. So yes, I took because I was the coordinator and this manual was then my responsibility, so I obviously took active interest in rewriting it and so on and so forth. The way we do it is that we discuss the course manual at the beginning of the term between course instructors, but there's a principled commitment to the law school to ensure that sort of one instructor does not step on the toes of another instructor in the classroom and let them manage their own classroom in the way that they wish to. I am not certain. So obviously there are people who follow different practices. Although since we have the common course manual this time, so at least everybody would have to at least look at the same course manual and then tell their students. So there's a certain degree of uniformity, but then otherwise it is not very uniform here, right? Especially in the delivery of the course, it's not very uniform at all. In fact, this time, unfortunately, one of my colleagues has not been not able to finish the course or not able to do the course, and I had to then I had to step in as a secondary instructor, as a course coordinator. You're often called upon to step in as a secondary instructor and things like that. So yeah, I mean there are good days and then there are bad days with the cohort that you're dealing with. So it's a bit tricky actually as a course coordinator, because I do not wish to tell any of my colleagues that you need to tell me what you're doing, because they're not reporting to me. I'm not somebody that they're bound to report to or tell me anything about, and at the same time I wish to facilitate by saying that look, if there are things that you wish to talk about, especially about how classes are going, then we should be able to talk about it. So I've hopefully enabled my colleagues to be able to talk and share experiences where necessary, and obviously we've arranged for meetings over the term, say once every 4 weeks or something, to come together and talk. Frankly speaking, I've had some of my colleagues have come more often than not to these meetings, and to the extent that we have shared experiences, that's been good. To the extent that other colleagues have wanted to know what I've been doing in the classroom and I wanted to know what they've been doing in the classroom, we've been able to exchange ideas and notes, and they've informed each other. But yeah, I think you're pointing out to a very, very clear limitation that the law school works with. I mean, there's still a good principled reason for not, fixing that problem also, because, teachers can have 5 very, very different ways of doing things, and all of which can be excellent, in which case you don't want them to sort of coordinate too much. But there is obviously the risk that you run that some of it might sort of, fall on the wayside a little bit. And yes, I'd be candid in saying that this time that has happened. And yes, that was not a good thing. But yeah, so I'll take that on.
So Shona, these are 5 different sections being taught by 5 different faculty.
We have 6 different sections, so I teach 2 and the others teach 1.
Yeah, thank you all very much.